Hi there, this is Shauna Lake, and I am the founder of Deep End Talent Strategies. I wanted to record a video to talk about how to overcome some gaps in employment on your resume, which also then translates into your ability to tell your story in the interview. So, I'm going to cover 5 key strategies today. Before I dive in, just a little bit about me. I have 23 years of human resources experience. There are a lot of HR consultants and there are a lot of career consultants and resume writers. I'm a little bit unique. My family would tell you I'm a lot unique, but specifically, I spend half of my time consulting with small businesses for recruiting and human resources needs. And I spend the other 50% of my time working with individuals and job seekers for resume writing, career coaching, mock interviewing, and a whole spectrum of topics. And the benefit of that is I can keep both sides connected to what the other needs and wants in today's job market. So many people can just work with businesses or just work with individuals, and it's really easy to get disconnected. And you'll be happy to know that this is not a video that's going to try to sell you into an expensive coaching package. In fact, I'm going to cover 5 key strategies for overcoming gaps on your resume. And then I'm going to talk about 3 very inexpensive, and one of them is free, tools that you can use. But rest assured, there is no sales pitch coming for an expensive coaching package. The 5 key strategies are number 1, just own it. And this is easier done in the interview than it is on the resume. But regardless of why you had a gap in your employment, whether it was you lost your job because of COVID or you lost your job for another reason, your position was eliminated, you had time with children or with elderly parents, or maybe you had the ability to travel Europe for 3 years. Whatever you were doing during the gap is valid and is nothing to be embarrassed about. What we need to do is figure out how to de-emphasize it on your resume so that you can get an interview and then you can tell your story if it comes up in the interview. The strategy number 1 is to just own it. Just know that sometimes you have to accompany that with some of these other strategies in order to get into the interview, because you may be running up against some recruiter biases, that a gap on your resume may be something to do with your work ethic or your job performance, or maybe you did something wrong on the job, and probably none of that is true. But those are the conclusions that sometimes people are going to make. The strategy number 2 is to have a functional resume. As you know, most resumes are chronological. They list your current or your most recent position with the details about that position and your responsibilities and your achievements. Then you go to the previous position, and they go in reverse chronological order. A functional resume is really turning that on its head, and it's grouping your experience by skill set and type of work. Then at the bottom, you might have a brief work history without a lot of detail. I'm going to show you an example. That is a really effective strategy for maybe 5 to 10% of the workforce. Not a lot of people fit into the criteria, but for those who do, it's highly effective. Number 3 is to describe what you were doing in the gap as if it was a job. And I say resume only on this slide because on your application, if you upload a resume and it automatically begins to pre-populate the online application, which is what we call parsing, you will need to delete something that wasn't actually a job. You can take a few creative liberties with a resume, but when you do an online application, you're going to sign a legal attestation that everything on that application is true and accurate. And so don't take any creative liberties on an application. So on a resume, you can do that. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. It's still truthful. It's just creative. And I'll show you what that looks like. Strategy number 4 is to put years and not months on your resume for your past positions. And what this does is allow you to cover up a gap that's under a year or sometimes even 2 years by just not drawing attention to it. And I will show you what that looks like. I actually have a personal preference that I think the resume looks clean and crisp with just the year, regardless of whether there's a gap or not. The downside is that most applications want you to put a month. Some people want you to put a specific date, as if we can remember those. So if you are applying to a high volume of positions, you'll find yourself having to do manual entry if you leave the months off of your resume. So from a convenience perspective, it's convenient to have the month on the resume, but just using the year looks clean and can be an effective strategy for overcoming gaps. And then number 5 is to use a chronological resume until you get to the gap, and then create a new section. And I'll show you an example where you can play by some different rules if it's a new section of the resume, and you can leave dates off. So you can really minimize the gap, and you can also make your resume a bit ageless. So if you're running up against some age bias or age discrimination, this is an effective strategy for that issue as well. So here's an example of a functional resume where someone was making a career change. In this example, and just as a note, all of the companies are fictitious, as well as location and job title and years, so that we can protect the identity of our clients. This person had been a veterinary tech for her entire career, but was trying to move into retail management. And her resume just wasn't getting any traction because her experience wasn't highly relevant, or at least it wasn't obvious how it was relevant. So she falls into that 5 to 10% of the population where a functional resume can make a lot of sense. What we did was look at her types of experiences and her qualifications from her experience as a vet tech, and we narrowed it down to 2 areas that translated very well into the retail management positions that she was applying for. And the first area was customer service, and the second was office and business management. So her resume, as you can see, talks about her customer experience background, of her achievements and how she's demonstrated customer service across her entire work history, not in any one particular job. Then there's the office and business management demonstration of those skill sets. And then there's a work history section at the bottom where her past positions are listed in chronological order, but without any detail. So this is a nice functional resume. But I also wanted to point out what's red underlined here. This is a way that you can use the strategy of talking about a gap as if it were a job. She was employed as a vet tech until the family relocated in 2018. So when we were working together in 2020, there was a gap. And she had been volunteering with her homeowners association in a volunteer property management role. So what we did was create a position to talk about the skills that she was using and put 2018 to present. So what it looks like is that there isn't a gap in employment. This is real work. She stays very busy and does meaningful work. She just doesn't get paid for it. So we've covered up a gap on the resume so she can get into the interview, and then she can tell her story. And I will tell you that while not, this isn't typical of every situation, she used this resume and got an interview the very next day and started 2 weeks later. So it does work. Now, on an application, this wouldn't be truthful because this wasn't a real job. So you would not want to put this on an application. But again, you could take some creative liberties on the resume. On the next page here, we have how you can describe a gap as a job in a couple of other examples. This is not the same resume. These are 2 different individuals. In the first example here, this was an individual who, again, the family had relocated, and while he was looking for a full-time position, he volunteered to help a friend start a restaurant. And he worked as an independent consultant, and he did a lot of meaningful work that translates very well into the job market. We wrote this on his resume at the top of a chronological resume as if it's the most current work, and the dates said to present. So this, to a recruiter who would see this resume, looks like he's actively working and there's no gap that requires an explanation. Again, on the application, that would be removed. But this works very well, especially when the gap is what you're doing right now. You're currently in that gap. Now, the second example here is a woman who owned a daycare in her home while her children were young, and that was 2006 to 2011. And then when her kids were both in school, she took an 8-year break and went to work for someone else. When she was ready to take a semi-retirement, she went back to watching a child in her home and is still doing that to my knowledge. So she was incorporated this entire time, even though there were periods where she didn't have any children in her care other than her own. But we were able to write this business listing out the specific duties that she did while running a legitimate business. And because it was incorporated for this amount of time, we wrote the dates on her resume and were able to minimize the fact that there is a gap, because the next position is listing what she did during that 8-year gap, so what looks like an 8-year gap here. So we were able to talk about her ability to stay home with her children on her resume as if it were a full-time job. It does help that she was an incorporated business, but you wouldn't have to be in order to list that on the resume. There's a lot going on this example. This is a director in the supply management logistics area. And what you're seeing on the screen is page 2 of his resume. His first page has a job that ends at 2009. It was actually an 11-month gap between this position ending in 2008 and the other one starting in 2009. But with the page break and only using years, you don't even notice. It was never an issue in his job search. Recruiters didn't ask. The other thing that we were able to strategically do on this resume was that his first positions, or first full-time positions, were at this company doing work that was very transferable to the jobs that he did for the last 20 years and what he wanted to continue doing. So this was a good position we wanted to make sure was represented on the resume. However, there was 10 years between leaving this position and starting this position. And in that 10 years, what he did wasn't highly transferable. By creating a new section called Other Relevant Experience, we were able to drop the year. It can drop the dates. It can follow a different format because it's a different section of the resume. We didn't have to include the 10 years of work that didn't translate very well. It was just taking up space on the resume. We were able to remove the years. You can't see a gap. But then also what's really important is you don't know from looking at this that he started this position in 1987. So you won't know from his resume how old he is, and it's going to help combat age discrimination. So this does a lot of things. It covers up a true gap in employment of 11 months by using the page break. It allows us to not create a gap unnecessarily by leaving off jobs that were irrelevant for 10 years. And we were able to minimize age discrimination in this example. So we've covered quite a bit. We talked about the 5 key strategies of overcoming employment gaps, which are just to own it, having a functional resume, describing what you did in the gap as if it was a job. Number 4 is using years but not months. And then number 5 is following a chronology until you get to the gap and then creating a new section and or using the page break strategically. So I hope that that's helpful. If you would like some additional resources, this is not my sales pitch into a high price coaching engagement, but I did mention that I have 3 resources you might benefit from. The first is a free resume builder. This is a hyperlink here, and I'll post it in the comments as well, that you can create a modern contemporary resume that will pass all of the automated screeners. You can build that out step by step. It's absolutely free. I also have a service where for $29, you can send your resume to me and I will record a feedback video and send you back my thoughts and suggestions to make your resume stronger and more competitive for today's job market. And then I have a job search playbook that comes with all of the information you can see in the picture here, a ton of resources. I literally put everything that you would need to know into one place, from LinkedIn, how to have a great profile, how similar it should be to your resume, to scripts to use to get connections on LinkedIn, talking about cover letters, the best job boards today, interviewing, exactly what to say, what not to say, how to handle some of those awkward and difficult questions you might get. some sample thank you letters for following up after the interview, and even some job negotiation, salary negotiation tactics. So it's an end-to-end playbook with a whole bunch of extras, and it's only $37. So I hope that you find value in that. And you can contact me at Shauna at deependstrategies.com for any additional resources, or let me know how I can help you in your job search process. Thank you very much. Connect with us on social media and let us know what we can do. Feel free to join our Facebook group as well. The Deep End Job Search is a great support group for people who are actively in the job market and those who are safely on the other side that can keep us inspired and give us all hope. Thank you for your time and have a great day.